Formula One will return to our screens in 3 weeks' time after what has been the longest break between a Grand Prix in the sport's history. As tough as it's been to cope, the sport has been through tougher times, such as the race that we're covering today. There's also been some big news for this year's calendar, which we bring in you before we go back to the 2005 USGP. Welcome back to the Formula One Grid Talk podcast. We are powered by the F1 Chronicle. Visit f1chronicle.com for news, reviews, and all things F1. Hosting today will be me, George Howson, and joining me today are F1 expert Alex Booth.
Hello.
Engineering student Owain Medford.
Hello.
And Master of Engineering, it's Jack Watson.
Hello.
Right, lads. So, yes, there's been some big news in terms of F1, obviously. We have the 8 races that have been confirmed in Europe. Silverstone, Austria, Hungary, Spain, a few others as well. Belgium and Italy, I believe, not in that order. But we have had some races cancelled as well, Alex. Azerbaijan, Japan and Singapore. And I guess in some way, it's not a huge surprise that those 3 have gone, 2 of them being street circuits and Japan wanting to focus on the Olympics.
No, it's not a surprise at all, because as you say, Azerbaijan and Singapore, both street circuits, so they would need more than anything official confirmation of the day. They couldn't have postponements really, because there's a lot of logistics to take into account with the preparation of a street circuit. And Japan as well, with the government there, they're saying they're not allowing any internationals to arrive in the country for the foreseeable future, so that would make hosting a Grand Prix impossible there. It's a shame because it's a great circuit, Suzuka. It's one that I think a lot of people would have liked to have seen remain on the calendar if there was going to be a long season this year. But unfortunately, it's the way it's going.
Yeah, we've had many casualties this year. Those 3 races have joined France, Monaco, and the Netherlands, but was all being cancelled as well. But yeah, in their place, Wayne, there are rumours about quite a few tracks potentially joining the calendar. Hockenheim for Germany, the Algarve circuit in Portugal, Imola and Mugello in Italy as well. There's quite a few rumours out there. I mean, do you see any of those joining the calendar in their place?
I think potentially just to get the numbers. Obviously, those are all Grade 1 listed circuits. So, obviously F1 can race there and they're quite easy to get to. And you wouldn't have to make that many alterations with the calendar because obviously we're going to Monza in September. There's a bit of a clash now with Le Mans, so they might have to avoid a weekend there. But I can see Mugello happening, or even sort of with Catalonia, they could go to Portugal at some point just after. It wouldn't be too hard for them to go to there.
Yeah, there's definitely possibilities there. I mean, those tracks are all great, but there's been a very negative rumour in terms of a Russian Grand Prix potentially being a double-header, Jack, around Sochi. I think I could speak for all F1s by saying, please, let's have Mugello or Imola instead of that.
Yeah, I mean, money talks in F1, we always know that. And if there are rumours, then they're probably a lot more advanced than we know about. I'm only saving hope in that scenario to prevent the dreaded Russian doubleheader. Mugello seems, when that rumour surfaced, it sounded like it was quite advanced. Also, Portimao and Imola have been vying for an F1 place for quite some time. It seemed like they've had Grade 1 listing for quite a while now. So they do seem to be doing a lot to get their circuit showcase, So, yeah, I mean, I think we speak for a vast majority of people when we say, yeah, there's a lot more out there than to do a double header in Sochi. I think I'd only just about watch the one. I actually think I might skip the second.
It's really not an exciting
happens.
track. Oh, I mean, I think if you want the stereotypical Tilkedrome, I think the Sochi Autodrome is that. It's as dull as anything. It really is. But yeah, like you say, money talks, and we could potentially have a double header there. But this is a perfect opportunity, I think, for F1 to go to some tracks that wouldn't usually be able to afford it. Unfortunately, Hockenheim fits into that category. But yeah, so we'll have to see. Let us know what you think the F1 calendar where the F1 circus will go after Italy, whether they'll stay in Europe for a bit longer or just head straight out to Asia, because there's the Chinese Grand Prix, Vietnam, even Australia. They're not technically all off the calendar yet. They're still possibly there at some point, although they don't have an official date yet. But yeah, so there were big news. We didn't mention this on the last podcast because it would have took too long to go into. The cost cap, the fabled cost cap, Alex, which I think F1's been talking about doing for maybe nearly 20 years now, is going to happen. It's going to come into place fully in 2022. I mean, I have to admit, I'm quite happy about this. I'm feeling quite positive about the changes they're wanting to implement here.
Well, I am as well. I mean, it's real life. You know, in any walk of life, you know, there's a budget for a business. You know, they can't just spend the money relentlessly. Formula One will have to, as needed to, because that's the only way that they can stop the smaller teams being priced out of the business. Really, I understand why Ferrari and Mercedes, like and Red Bull in that category as well, the main work teams will be against it because they'll see it as you know, it's big boys game, and the ones who can't afford it, then they shouldn't be there. But it's not altogether fair, and it's something that's been, like you say, has been vying for a long time. Max Mosley nearly forced the rule in. I think it was about 2008, but all the news of the world scandal kicked off, and that got back delayed. And then they were trying to get it brought in, and there were teams threatening to break away and make their own series. I think Ferrari have actually committed to it, and so it looks like that the future's a bit more stable than it looked like it was at one point. And it's set at 145 million euros, and anyone exceeding that will be penalised. Where the penalties that will be, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if Ferrari agree to it, then it's probably going to happen. Then if they don't agree to something like that, it isn't. That's the way F1 is, I'm afraid. But yeah, no, it is really good. I think the teams can opt to do it next year if they want, but they don't have to. Just sort of test it out. But from 2022, the cost cap will come in. I might not be the most up-to-date information, but I've got here that it starts at $145 million, then next year 140, and the year after that 135, potentially goes lower than that. But it is really positive, Owain, because it'll help stabilise the teams that are struggling right now, like Williams, but also help to attract new teams, because we haven't had a new team since 2016 when Haas joined.
No, yeah. So obviously the sort of financial situation in Formula One has been, you know, very, very uneven, with sort of the big teams, or the teams in the top three, skimming a lot off the top, or having, you know, historical team payments and all this sort of stuff. You know, I think those are still going to exist, really, but you know, there is a limit to what the teams can spend. And I think that I like the direction that the financial rules have gone in that they're limiting what teams, like basically they seem to have struck a balance where they are limiting what teams would, you know, like to spend a lot of money on, but not limiting, you know, if you want to go and spend £500 million on catering companies, then yeah, sure, you can go and spend £500 million on your catering, you know, directly limiting it to factors directly affecting performance. I think that the sort of wind tunnel limit is quite good as well. I'm not sure. I did hear rumours quite a while ago when they tried to do that in the past, you know, the amount of CFD time went through the roof. So that might not work out so well, but I think it's a good direction they've taken them in. It's a smart direction that they've taken them in.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, the wind tunnel time is an interesting one, because for the first time kind of ever, really, F1 seems to be giving an advantage to teams that finish lower. So basically, the lower you finish in the Constructors' Championship, the more tests you'll be able to do in a wind tunnel. So, i.e., you'll have more time to improve the components on your car before you test them out on track. Not included in the budget. I can hear some people screaming already, oh, but Lewis Hamilton's on £100 million a year. It doesn't matter. Driver contracts, marketing, the three highest paid people at the team other than drivers, employee bonuses, championship entry fees, engine supply deals, travel and hotels, purchase of super license, and non-Formula One activities do not count towards the budget of $145 million. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting one in terms of the wind tunnel time, Jack. I mean, how do you expect that's going to impact the teams that finish lower, especially with a big regulation change coming up in 2022?
It is going to be interesting, like you say. It's taken around, if I remember correctly, it's taken around a sort of a baseline in the middle of the championship. So any higher than fifth, I think it is, you get an increase of 0.05% of wind tunnel, of like the allotted wind tunnel time going. So if you finish higher than fifth, that gets chopped down the fixed ratio, and then if you're finishing on that, it goes up. You get more. Sorry, I explained that really badly. It'll be useful to work out like instabilities. So we should see less of what we've seen, especially recently with Williams, as a good example of aerodynamic instabilities coming into braking under DRS and stuff like that. But at the same time, your three highest paid personnel are excluded from that budget gap, which can sometimes include chief engineers. So you might not be able to poach the most experienced engineer who might still miss areas like that. So it should help, but it won't be like a foolproof, like, oh, it's going to completely reverse the grid every time when the championship finishes. Like, that's not realistically how it's going to go. Yeah, you get that bit more time, but you still need the experience. And currently, the experience is a little bit, not so much now, but a little bit still behind the paywall, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's not going to propel Williams straight to the top immediately or something like that. You know, the teams at the very top. You know, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari. You know, even ones like McLaren to an extent, they'll still be up there because they have the budget to pay the higher paid personnel. But you know, development of the car being limited like that, I think it's very good. I think it'll hopefully really equalise it. But I think as well, Alex. I mean, we mentioned this while I've been chatting in our group chat. You know, people don't really realise how close the grid is today compared to what it was 20 years ago. You know, you used to have cars being like 7-8 seconds a lap slow, like the 40s back in the 90s. They weren't competitive at all.
Well,
yeah. Oh, sorry, was that me?
Sorry, I said Alex. It's fine.
Oh, sorry, go on.
It's all right. Go on, Alex.
Well, I was just going to say that's why the 107% rule was brought in, because there were too many teams that were coming into Formula One that clearly were not competitive enough to be there, and they were qualifying sometimes 10 seconds a lap slower, and they were being lapped probably about 5 or 6 times during the race, and it sometimes really is lap 10. But it's not just, I think, the gap between the front and the back. It's also, if you look at a lot of the races where the points were down to 6 positions, many a time was the 4th and 5th places lap. And now, that does still happen now, but not very often. I think Hungary this year, we had Verstappen and Hamilton were a long way ahead of the rest of the field, but it doesn't happen often. Generally, a lot of the drivers tend to finish on the same lap. So it is a lot closer than people think. I know it's hard to say that when you've got Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull consistently at the top. But if you do look at the result, you'd realise that if you are trying to even up the field, there's not as much work to do as you think there is.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and I think the field, in some ways, is quite close today. But there is a big gap between those top 3 teams and the rest, and that needs to be addressed. And I think that's partly because of the sheer amount of money that those 3 can spend compared to the rest. But this will hopefully stop that going forward, especially with new regulations coming into it. It should really equalise the field. But we'll see what happens. I mean, let us know what you think. Let us know on Twitter. Tweet us at F1 Chronicle, or on our Facebook page as well, F1 Chronicle there as well. Just let us know where you think this cost cap is good, whether it's near enough foolproof, or is there anything else that F1 can do to kind of even it up a bit. But yeah, like I mentioned, the sport has definitely been through a lot worse times. Now, we're going to go back 15 years now. It's 2005, the US GP. Now, it's fair to say, Owain, that Formula One has had a very troubled history trying to establish itself in America. And this race, pretty much for a while, put the nail in the coffin, really, for having an established US GP.
Obviously, there's a different mindset to your average American than you'd get over here. You know, the Americans do expect, if they pay for something, they want to get something in return for it. You know, that's fairly true everywhere else. But you know, you see it in almost all sort of industries in America. So to have what happened at the US Grand Prix in 2005, that really disenfranchised a whole sort of generation worth of fans, and it did take a long while to get that kind of sort of almost want for Formula One to come back, that desire for Formula One to come back. You know, it really did sort of take a while for Formula One to earn that back.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few races after that, 2006, 2007, but it took until 2012 for another one, the first one at COTA. Now, this race is colloquially known sometimes as Indygate, sometimes it's known as Tyregate. And Jack, the tyres were really the key to this one. We had a tyre war back then between Bridgestone and Michelin. There was no single supplier like we have now, Ferrari. And the Michelin tyres just simply weren't good enough for that weekend, and the consequences were disastrous.
Absolutely. So a bit of background. As you say, Bridgestone and Michelin, we had the rule in that year for no pit stops to change tyres, only fuel. So your tyres had to last the entire race. Also, with regards to the track, all the issues were with the banked final corner at turn 13, which is Indy Oval Turn 1. Earlier that year, for the month of May, the 2005 Indy 500, the track had been diamond ground to improve the grip, to increase the qualifying speeds for the Indy cars. It worked great, but that meant as the F1 cars were coming over it when they were in practice, it was having much increased wear. Now, in that time, Bridgestone was a much harder tyre compared to the Michelins. The Michelins would normally be softer and faster, but degrade faster, whereas the Bridgestones would be harder and have a longer longevity. They could work for that time period. But as practice got underway, we started to see quite a few incidences, all with Michelin runners, where the tyres couldn't cope with the load and wear being placed on them through that bank corner.
Yeah, and that's the real key to it, isn't it? I mean, if you can imagine it, it's somewhat like what we're going to see with Zandvoort next year now. But the difference is that they were doing nearly 200 miles an hour around that corner. And like you said, the diamond ground surface as well made a massive difference, Jack. But yeah, I mean, I think it was Ralf Schumacher, wasn't it, Alex, who crashed, and I believe it was practice, not qualifying. And that really sent things kind of haywire because they were thinking, all right, Schumacher's got kind of lucky here. This could and probably would happen to a lot of people during the race.
Well, Ricciardo's onto, because in those days, the third driver would take part in the practice session. Certainly for teams that had finished the previous year outside the top three, they'd have the third driver play the practice session as well. And Ricciardo's onto was the first one in the earlier part of the lap. And minutes after that, Ralf Schumacher, his rear tyre failed and he slammed into the concrete wall. Shockingly similar to the accident he had the year before in the Williams that put him out for 6 races. Fortunately, he wasn't injured in the crash, although he was ruled unfit to race, and Zonta was scheduled to replace him. But that did spark the debate of whether the Michelins could handle the stress put on them in the banked corner, which, as Jack had mentioned, is being recently resurfaced.
Yeah, and another big problem, Owain, like Jack said as well, is that 2005 was, they brought in a bunch of regulations to basically neuter Ferrari, because Ferrari had just swept the competition away for the past 6 years. But they brought in a bunch of new rules, and one of them being that you couldn't change tyres during the race. And we saw this dramatically it was the European Grand Prix at Nürburgring when Kimi Raikkonen chose not to change his tyres and ended up ripping his suspension apart. But they changed the rules slightly for this race after that. But the fact that they couldn't change tyres and the Bridgestones had to do the whole race, it basically meant that Michelin couldn't afford to do pit stops.
I think the FIA ruled that it would be in breach of the rules for the Michelin teams to do pit stops. And you've got to remember also that, the tyres had to do the qualifying of your fastest lap in qualifying and then do the race as well, which obviously caused some issues at other points in the season, I think Imola as well for Ferrari. It was sort of putting very high load on the outside of the tyre, and that was sort of breaking down the shoulder of the tyre. And yeah, they would have been penalised were they to go in every 10 laps. I think it was for every 10 laps for tyre changes. I think Michelin also flew in new tyres, and there was talk of using those, but they failed during testing when they tested them. And obviously just the logistical problems of manufacturing and then shipping over. We're talking, 14 runners on the grid? Was it 14 or 18? It's either 14 or 16. I can't remember how many cars there were at that time. It was either 22
14.
sort of thing. 14 runners. You're talking. I can't remember how many laps the race was, but we're talking hundreds of tyres that were. It wasn't conceivable to do those in a weekend.
Yeah, and it was just plain unsafe at the end of the day. It didn't take many laps to ruin them. I mean, like you said, changing the tyres every 10 laps. That's 7 pit stops during the race. Even the peak of 2013's Pirelli Tyregate, it wasn't that farcical. It just would have been completely uncompetitive for the Michelin teams. And Jack, they suggested all sorts of things to try and combat this. Run it as a non-championship event, but chicaning for the final corner. Like the Bridgestone runners skipped the final chicane, but nothing really stuck. Nobody really agreed to anything, and eventually that meant that potentially we could have had a race that had only 6 runners.
As far the way I take it is, it wasn't for lack of trying. There was so many options put forward, but obviously Ferrari still had its pushing power back then, and it was on the Bridgestones, Ferrari, and then Jordan and Minardi. Jordan very much not in their good form at that point, and Minardi is well Minardi. So all of the pushing was being done by Ferrari at that point. And with John Todd and the FIA, it was often said this is going to be grossly unfair to the Bridgestone runners, Ferrari. So, yeah, like you say, they could put in a chicane. It was initially suggested to limit the speed for the Michelin runners, but you can't tell drivers to not drive flat out. That just doesn't work. Put the chicane in, almost have a rallycross Joker style lap where the Michelin take the chicane and Bridgestone don't. That was rejected. Michelin did try to bring in tyres overnight, but they were told that if they changed their spec, it was essentially breaking, not strictly, but essentially breaking like parc fermé almost, and making illegal changes to a car. So yeah, it was heavily resistive and to any support of that, and they wound up blowing up in their faces. There was a little bit of controversy between the Bridgestone runners as well, but I'm sure someone else will be covering that in a minute.
Yeah, and that someone else is probably going to be Alex, because he's our fact man for F1. He knows everything about everything, so no pressure. I'm joking. Yeah, you are the F1 expert on this show, so. But yeah, no, I'm like Jack said there. I mean, there was three runners for Bridgestone. There was Ferrari, there was Jordan, and there was Minardi. If I remember correctly, Alex, Minardi, Paul Stoddart was just like, I'm not going to race. This isn't worth it. And I think Jordan were questioning running as well, but I think they were bullied into it by Ferrari. I mean, I'm sure you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's true. Paul Stoddart wasn't happy about it. He didn't want the cars to race either. He thought that it wasn't a race, and for him, it destroyed the battle really between Jordan and Minardi, which because obviously they were in a position where they could get high position and then never have that again in the rest of the season. So you know, under normal circumstances, one of those teams might have got lucky. They might have got 1 point, and that would have made a huge difference to them in the Constructors' Championship. And Indianapolis killed it for them. Although for Jordan, they got the better picking because Tiago Monteiro finished third and Lorraine Carter came fourth. So yeah, that I can see why the smaller teams weren't very happy about that. Just as well, before the race, the chicane proposal was rejected for two reasons. One is a sporting reason, in the sense that you can't really just change something because the competitors have turned up with substandard equipment. It'd be like a football match, and one team turns up with boots without studs on, and then they demand that the other players and the other teams play without studs on. It doesn't work. And also, they would have been putting a chicane in without the required inspection by and the homologation that a circuit needs to pass before it hosts the race. And if there'd been a serious accident and there'd been a driver being injured or killed or spectators injured, then the FIA would have had an American court coming up to them saying, "Oh, but you didn't follow your procedures," and they'd have no defence against a massive jury, and they won't have a leg to stand on. So they would. That can be seen as looking after themselves, but in hindsight, what happened was perhaps the correct thing to do, although it wasn't very popular, because the simple fact of the matter is the Michelin teams had become unprepared and there was no getting out of it. It's a shame they just couldn't have been cancelled altogether, hosted later on in the season, but obviously it's not as easy as that.
Yeah, not as easy as that. I just thought about something though. I remember, I think it was 1982, the old FISA FOCA Award, subject that we were potentially going to cover. I thought there was a rule that said that you had to have, 14 starters for it to be an F1 championship event, but only 6 drivers started that race. So how did that work? Because it was a race where all full points were awarded to those 6 drivers.
I think I can answer that for you, or unless Alex has a better answer. I'm assuming he does.
No, I'll go for it, Owain. I wasn't aware of that. So, Owain, fire away.
Right. Basically, essentially the way it worked was all 20 cars lined up on the grid for the formation lap. They did the formation lap, and all the Michelin runners. Like there were those radio conversations that you hear. I would highly suggest going back and watching the ITV coverage of it at the time, because it's an hour's worth of coverage, but you've had the ITV reporters running up and down the grid just trying to get answers off people, and even onto the formation lap. Obviously, everyone's lined up. Everyone's it looks like a normal race. None of this was communicated to the fans about what was going to happen. If there was an issue whatsoever. They turned up assuming it's a big crowd at Indy. 250,000. They were expecting a proper race. But what happened was all the Michelin runner teams pulled in at the end of the formation lap, and there's I believe radio messages that you can hear from, I think, David Coulthard, essentially Kimi Räikkönen as well, arguing with their engineers of, I want to race, let's go racing, it's fine, I'll just slow down in turn 13 or whatever. on the formation lap before they get pulled in. That's I think how they got around that rule. Essentially, obviously having 20 people starting the race, but there's nothing to stop teams pulling in at the end of the formation lap. They all just retired the car at that point.
Yeah, like you said, it was a fallen event in terms of everybody lining up. Sorry, Alex, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I actually, this is bad on my part. I wasn't aware of that rule, which I probably should have been. But yeah, so essentially what I'm saying, there were 20 starters and 14 retirements in theory.
Yes,
So
yeah. It's just an absolute. It's such a weird event, and thankfully this has never happened again. We've never seen anything like this before or since. But yeah, all 20 drivers did line up on the grid. Jarno Trulli was, I think, he got his only pole position of his career. He got a pole position in the Toyota, which is very impressive. Toyota as well. I mean, I want to touch on them because they were very hard done by this race, because the 18 points that Ferrari ended up making Ferrari third in the Constructors' Championship ahead of Toyota. If nobody scored any points for this race, Toyota probably would have finished third in the championship instead of fourth, above Ferrari. They were very, very hard done by in this race, I've got to say. But yeah, they all lined up on the grid. They all did the formation lap, and the 14 Michelin drivers came into the pits and withdrew. And then, Jack, we had 2 Ferraris, 2 Minardis, and 2 Jordans lining up on the grid with gaping holes in all between them.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most infamous images in modern F1, certainly. And it was, well, what could we say? It was a farce. It was a total farce. I mean, at least all of them finished, amazingly. So, yeah, I mean, the only fight that was going to be there was the Minardis and the Jordans, and even then that just sort of petered out as the race went on. Yeah, I mean, it finished as you expected. Schumacher first, Barrichello about, was it second and a half? Yeah, second and a half behind. And then a very, very happy Tiago Monteiro, who gave no cares on the podium. That is, I mean, if you can see the footage, I'd like probably skip the race, I would say. But yeah, once you've seen that skip forward to the podium, it's awful reaction from the crowd. They're throughout the race, they're throwing cans and things like that onto the track. And yeah, but that's about the only ray of sunshine that came out of it, was a very happy Tiago Monteiro.
Yeah, Tiago Monteiro getting his only podium in Formula One. Unbelievable. Like, he didn't care. He was absolutely ecstatic.
He was loving life.
The thing is, though, I don't blame him. It's a token podium, but he still had to beat competition to do it, and he still got a podium. Fair play to him in that front, but it just seems so weird. The crowd, like you say, just booing like no tomorrow, and Tiago's he's just loving life. He's on top of the world. But yeah, people were throwing all. I think Schumacher had to dodge like a can of beer or like a cup of beer or something at some point. Like, they were chucking all sorts onto the track. Like you say, 250,000 fans, 250,000 fans. So for perspective, that is, that's over 2.5 times. No, it's over 3 times the capacity of Wembley, England's football stadium. It's 250,000 people. It's an enormous amount of people, and none of them would have left happy. None of them. It would have been. Just imagine paying all that money and going there. I think quite a few of them got compensation. I might be wrong, but I think quite a few of them sued and got something back. I tell you, wanted to say something, Alex, about that.
Well, Michelin did accept responsibility, rightly so, and they what they did was they purchased. I can't remember the exact figure, but they did purchase tickets for next season, for the 2006 season race. That they would give away free for that race, and they did, and the fans were refunded. But I wanted to add, there was one element of excitement in that race, in inverted commas, was that Schumacher came out the pit lane and nearly took Rubens Barrichello out.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Now, can you just imagine how ridiculous it would have been if we took each other out and we had a Jordan 1-2 with a Minardi on the podium?
It almost would have been worth watching.
Oh my days!
I can't believe I forgot about that.
But I think the only people who were happy that day were Portuguese and Indian fans because of Monteiro and Cartagena.
Yeah, the rain car to Kane picking up a few points as well. I think he said he finished fourth. I'm just going to check the actual results from the race.
Yeah, Katsuki fourth, Alba's fifth, and Friesaka sixth.
Well done, well done.
I have a screen up. I
No,
can't
don't tell him that. Don't tell him that, Jack. Take the credit, man.
I can't do that.
Yeah, really impressive from Tiago Monteiro from 17th on the grid to third by the finish. Carter Kane up to fourth from 19. Friesaka, 6th from 20th.
We talk about pit lane to points all the time, don't we?
Yeah. Real impressive in the minority, no less, as well. Truly, though, pole position to 7th. It's not good enough, I'm afraid. But yeah, no. Honestly, it's the most ridiculous incident in Formula One history. It's something that people will tell you about, and you just be like, "Well, no, that didn't happen." You know, I've been to F1 Grand Prix, and I've told fans about this who didn't know about it, and they're just like, "No, you're bullshitting me. There's no way that happened." Just like, look it up. It did. I don't want you to know about it, but it did happen. Unbelievable.
The winner was ITV because I got a BAFTA for their coverage. Genuinely got a BAFTA for it.
Really? Did they win BAFTA that year?
I believe so, yeah.
Wow.
Hold on.
Oh, God. I mean, that was
I
the
do remember
same.
watching that race live, and it was one of those things where your jaws just dropped to the floor, like,
This can't be happening.
Yeah.
That was the same year, though, when they took an advert break and missed some of Alonso and Schumacher's battle at Imola.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
It's undeserved BAFTA, in my opinion.
I know they definitely won one for the year after when Jenson Button won in Hungary.
Yeah. Look up to finish that race as well. 2006 Hungarian Grand Prix. James Allen in the com box, which was absolutely mental. I think someone else was co-commentating as well instead of Brundle that day. I think it was Davidson or someone like that.
Yeah.
He must have just been thinking, wow, is it always as good to commentate? Like, geez.
Well, I imagine Brundle was sitting there just going, well, got away with that one.
Yeah, oh man. Yeah, absolutely farcical race. I remember, I think they interviewed Flavio Briatore during the race, and someone just said, Flavio, what do you think the result will be? I think first Schumacher, second Barrichello, and third, who cares? He was not a happy bunny, Flavio, that day. Oh man. But yeah, I mean, this had very far-reaching consequences as well. I think the Spygate really finished off Max Mosley, but I don't think this would have helped him. It wouldn't have helped a lot of people up in the top levels of Formula One because it's just a farcical event, really.
Yeah, it damaged the FIA's reputation. It certainly tarnished Formula One's image in America for a long time, as you mentioned earlier. And Indianapolis survived for another 2 more years, but then it was gone. And and you were talking about Max Moser. That was probably the first scandal that he faced that led to the end of his tenure. I mean, there was Spygate, and then there was the Nelson Piquet cheating controversy. Plus, outside of Formula One, the News of the World controversy.
Yeah, that caused a lot of controversy with Formula One. But F1 is happy now in America relatively. They've got COTA, they've had it since 2012, and they're getting the Miami Grand Prix next year, I believe. The quality of that circuit is very much debate, but 2 races in the United States for the first time since the 80s at least. They had quite a few races back then. They had an East and West GP and good old Caesar's Palace as well, but less said about that, the better. But it is good to see Formula One has recovered in America, and of course they have the American team in Haas as well. So, it took a long time, but Formula One is getting a foothold again in America. But it's always remained a difficult market for them because they're very much into their NASCAR and IndyCar over there. They don't really care for cars that turn right most of the time. No, I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to go into it.
That's a massive can of worms you're risking opening there.
I think most of our listeners are actually American, so howdy everyone. I didn't mean that. I'm only joking.
Howdy! Oh my god.
Why are we here?
I would like to correct myself. I said it was for the ITV won a BAFTA. It was apparently for the Monaco Grand Prix that year. But
fair play.
In all seriousness, though, I will say I think what we were talking about with the American interest in Formula One, I think what it does need more than anything else is a driver, because we saw it with Michael Schumacher did it for Germany. Germany wasn't particularly a country with a great Formula One fan base before he arrived on the scene. Spain was more interested in motorcycles than Formula One until Fernando Alonso arrived. I think it's going to take an American driver who has the potential to be a superstar to really grab the American fans' attention. Having a team's good enough, but only as far, but that can only get you as far.
Maybe if Juan Pablo Montoya had been a bit more successful.
Yeah. I think they missed a trick with Alexander Rossi, to be honest.
He's a very questionable character, though. I won't go into some of the things that he said online over the years, but he could have been a star. Definitely, he could have done all right. I don't think there's anybody really in the pipeline yet.
Not really. Now is the time, though. Like they seem to have warmed up to road course racing now more than ever. Their endurance series is doing well. The IndyCar's road courses have got strong, and even in NASCAR, surprisingly, they're after a few more road courses too. So, yeah, I mean, it's now more than ever, and I'm pretty sure Haas are still doing their bit to try and locate someone from Indy Lights, potentially. It's going to bug me. I can't remember their name now. I'm going to kick myself for it. Carry on. I'll probably wind up putting it in the group chat at some point.
Let us know in the comments below if you can guess who Jack is talking about.
It wasn't Pato O'Ward, was it?
That was it.
Hey!
That was it.
So yeah, they are looking for talent. I think Juan Manuel Correa can get it out. He's American. He could have been in Formula One in a couple of years. Unfortunately, that horrific injury he got last year, I think that's going to set him back at the very least. Hopefully, he gets there. But it'll take him a lot longer, obviously. But yeah, so absolutely farcical event at Indy. If you thought Formula One was tough to bear right now, of it not being on the telly for so long, trust me, it's better than it being on and things like that happening. It was just unbelievable. But yeah, thankfully, I don't touch wood. We won't ever see anything like that again, especially with a sole tyre supplier as well being in the sport. So F1's learned a lot of lessons from that race. But yeah, thank you for joining us, lads. I really do appreciate you coming on today's show.
No problem.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time to preview the Austrian Grand Prix. Yes, we'll preview it, and hopefully this race will actually happen this time. We previewed the Australian Grand Prix, and it never happened. But yes, be sure to tune in. Hopefully we've got Twitch working by then. And today's worked as a bit of a tester with Twitch. It'll be most likely live at Sunday, 2 p.m, while 3 p.m. UK time. Just search for F1 Grid Talk on Twitch and follow us. But yes, make sure to also check us out on YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Omni Studio, Pocket Cast. Just search for the F1 Grid Talk on there. Follow, like, subscribe, all that good stuff on there. We do appreciate it. We've got a Reddit for if you want to leave some feedback. Just look for new F1 podcast looking for feedback. We've got a subreddit as well for the Formula One Grid Talk, and a Patreon as well if you want to donate to better lights, mics, and a potentially better camera for some people in this room. I won't say who.
That's pretty harsh.
I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anymore. But yeah, so thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time to preview the Austrian Grand Prix. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Right.
Bye.
Great.